Commissioner of Police Alistair Guevara says that the threat that ultimately led to the state of emergency has been neutralized. I have with me Acting Superintendent Zahir Ali on the program with us this morning. He's a TTPS's legal officer. Welcome to the program, Mr. Ali, and thank you very much for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here as well, Ryan, and good morning to all our viewers and listeners. And just, I see you have promoted me to Acting Superintendent, Acting Sergeant. That's all right.
My apologies. Mr. Guevara is going to be very disappointed in me.
That's all right.
But let's start with the state of emergency. We continue in a state of emergency as a country. The Commissioner has said that the threat has been neutralized. What can the country expect now that he has said that the threat that ultimately led to this country being under an SOE has been neutralized?
How I'll respond to that, Ryan, at the point of the declaration of the state of emergency, the criminal syndicates and gangs coming together did in fact pose a serious threat to Trinidad and Tobago in terms of what their intended activities were. And the fact that there has been an intervention by law enforcement to actually remove persons from a state of comfort, if I should say that, in order to give law enforcement the opportunity to investigate, the neutralizing of the threat is in that particular context. It doesn't dismiss the fact that inquiries are being conducted expeditiously to gather evidence to be able to prosecute persons with reference to that those plans to commit acts of criminality.
The intelligence suggests that a lot of the members of these gangs who have been plotting, let's have a look at the front page of the TNT Guardian newspaper, and that's one such instance this morning. The intelligence suggests that the police service has been making inroads into breaking up these plots, so to speak. Do you see medium-term benefits, short-term benefits to this minor successes, perhaps you might call it major successes, that the TTPS has had at the start of this SOE?
Well, most certainly, Ryan, the fact that we have brought the matter under control, that in itself is an immediate success. And prior to the intervention of the law enforcement agencies, you would have seen reports of kidnapping. You'd have seen reports of consistent extortion. Not that these offenses are not being committed still, but you're seeing a reduction in terms of the activities of these criminal gangs. So yes, there is an immediate reduction. Yes, we have some level of control, but we are fully aware that it has to be a sustained effort in order to really eradicate and really disrupt and dismantle these criminal gangs.
I'm really glad that you mentioned a sustainable effort. That's a real key word that you used there, because if we're going to have any long-term success, it has to be over a sustained period of time. One of the challenges, well, the great challenge, and it's something that I've often thought about since this state of emergency has been instituted, Mr. Ali. The challenge in this country has been the illegal inflow of weapons, be it through customs, be it through marine borders, you name it. We have an influx of illegal weapons making its way into our country. And anyone really who wants a weapon in that regard and who has the contacts can have that weapon. That's not something, I mean, maybe you can, but the state of emergency really has been breaking up the networks of criminal gangs. But that particular issue of the influx of illegal weapons, be it through legal ports of entry or illegal ports of entry, might you say that I'm correct, that if we do not address and arrest that matter, then crime, those petty crimes that we see in home invasions and holding up grocery stores, etc., those things will not be unabated?
Excellent question, Ryan. And I'm happy that you're linking it now beyond the boundaries of Trinidad and Tobago and looking at it from not only a national context.
Well, we don't manufacture guns, Mr. Ali. We don't. So it has to be coming from somewhere else.
Correct. And I'm happy that you're now bringing this transnational context into the discussion. And that would call immediately for the strengthening of units like the transnational crime unit, transnational organized crime unit, to be able to look at transnational crime with the importation. And may I say, if you look at the emergency regulations in the schedule, you'll see that we are not only looking at matters prejudicial to public safety and security, but even the defense of Trinidad and Tobago. And, in that context, the transnational organized crime unit, why you are seeing the orthodox, if I should say that, law enforcement, the various unit specialist section from a local context. We need now to be looking at the transnational crime unit, the strategic services agency. So other agencies must get involved to be able to deal with it both from a local jurisdiction and from a transnational context.
Because my point is, if we can deal with the state of emergency, we can crack the gangs open and dismantle them. But if we don't deal with that influx of those weapons coming in, it has the potential to collapse everything that is being done under the state of emergency. Am I right?
And most certainly, again, Ryan, and when we overheard about the choice of weapon being firearms, and when we speak about firearms, we are seeing prohibited weapons, which is automatic firearms, rifles, 7.62 caliber ammunition. So you are very, very right in terms of, if we are speaking about disrupting and dismantling, it must be also disarming these criminal gangs so they do not have the capacity, because we know that they rely on the firepower to have their strength in a local context, even from a transnational context. So the disruption and the dismantling must also be directed to disarming them. So a great question this morning, and I really hope that the other agencies external to the TTPS also recognize the importance of making their contribution during the state of emergency.
We have seen reports that there may be a new SSA director on the helm. What reports have you gotten? Because you are saying this morning that different arms of the national security instrument, such as SSA, really ought to be playing its role. Do you have an update for us? Have you heard anything about the SSA becoming a major part of this crime fight?
Well, from experience, Ryan, the SSA, has always been, a stakeholder around the table. But, what I'm asking for is a deeper appreciation, a deeper contribution towards law enforcement efforts, because it's a very sensitive area, so I cannot speak to the depth that I would like to speak, but the SSA has a major role to play, and it must be playing that role in partnership with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to be able to have our best effort to deal with crime and criminality.
One of the concerns post last SOE is the medium-term to long-term benefits of that SOE.
Yes.
And whether that SOE was a success or not is still very much a conflict and a debate around many households in Trinidad and Tobago, because the Commissioner of Police sat right here and spoke to me about a month ago and said that after each SOE, we see this natural uptick in crime. Maybe not the upsurge, maybe the word that he used, but you get my point.
Yes.
We see a rise in homicides and a rise in crime. How confident are you that post this SOE, the country going through this, what I like to term sacrifice, that there will be some measure of safety and success post SOE, that we wouldn't have to go back to seeing front pages of homicides and murders and home invasions, that fatal home invasions at that?
Again, excellent question, Ryan. And what I can say at this time is that while the SOE is unfolding and we are utilizing the additional powers, there's a lot of thinking and there's a lot of restructuring, a lot of strategies that have been put in place to ensure that subsequent to the SOE, that there's proper systems and structures to be able to continue to sustain all law enforcement efforts. Because you're right, whether it's a 3 months, whether it's a 6 months, whether it will come to an end at some point in time. So any sensible and intelligent and proactive thinking will definitely be looking into the direction of putting systems in place to be able to deal with gangs. And that issue of gangs have been a very troubled area for us. So I think the opportunity now with the suppression that we are employing, that is important for us to develop those strategies to be able to disrupt and dismantle, which is the critical area. I've said it 3 times this morning because it is very, very important.
Let's move to stand your ground legislation. Does the stand your ground legislation proposal keep you up at night as a legal officer in the TTPS?
It definitely did, and not only at night, Ryan, just before coming into this room. I had a quick glimpse at that particular legislation. And I think it's a very sensitive but interesting legislation. And, permit me this morning, to make 1 or 2 very strong calls as an attorney who has a responsibility to assist in the reform or the development of the law. Permit me this morning just to make 3 salient points. But I don't know whether you had a follow-up question before I do
please,
that.
Please.
A lot of commentary has been given to that particular piece of legislation. First thing I want to do, Ryan, is to, acknowledge the government's position to use the rule of law to assist in protecting the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And what excites me further is the fact that it has a referendum resemblance in terms of encouraging the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to participate in the lawmaking process. So I just want to identify that at the very outset. But I think that this legislation, the discussions, respectfully, I think the first thing I'd like to identify is that the Director of Public Prosecutions should be factored into this legislation so that you're placing greater protection for an occupant of a dwelling house who utilizes this legislation when it comes into law to defend his property or defend himself or members of that particular household. You want to ensure there's an independent office, there's a check and balance to ensure that persons are not, and persons meaning the TTPS, do not run to charge persons who are utilizing this legislation, but put it in the hands of the DPP to give that consent. So that's number one. Number two, very, very critical. I think that this, if it comes into law, it should be attracting a sunset clause or a provision that will call for a review within 18 months of this legislation. Because this legislation, you do not know how it will be applied, how it will be utilized. It's important for the legislators to be taking a very responsible position to say, okay, in 18 months, we'll review it to see whether we need to make an adjustment, whether we need to take it off the law books. So I think that's a very significant matter in terms of a sunset clause or a review provision. And finally, I think that with looking at the legislation, you are seeing a need for a proclamation after it's assented by the Parliament. I think that period is a critical area for us to continue to encourage education, because it's a new piece of legislation. It's a sensitive legislation. And I think that the average citizen must be given sufficient time to be able to absorb and understand the working of this particular legislation. So I just want to stay there for now with these three submissions. I think that it will enhance the legislation, but I welcome using the rule of law to assist in fighting crime and criminality.
Those are three incredibly important points that you've raised. Have you seen the willingness and how critical is it that the government of this country, they're having public consultations in every constituency?
Yes.
How critical is it that they come to the constituency of the police service and sit down with the police service and have the conversation that you're having with me this morning? I
think that's a proactive thinking, Ryan. I think that when we are speaking about consultation, every stakeholder should be engaged. And if you have the primary law enforcement body who will be called upon to enforce this legislation, I think that good sense should prevail and there should be some level of engagement. Maybe there's some level of engagement with the upper echelon of the TTPS, but I think it's important to engage the TTPS. But may I reciprocate it? That if the TTPS are also seeing the legislation in my respectful view, I think that, and perhaps, with your question this morning, perhaps I may respectfully, bring it to the attention of the upper echelon of the TTPS to say, okay, here's a bill that is being debated in the public domain. We have an interest in this particular legislation, and perhaps we as well can create a policy paper or a contribution, maybe individually or collectively, to be able to contribute to the conversation.
Let's talk about Stand Your Ground in a different context now. Over the last 2 nights, there was a public consultation in Urupuch East, and the issue of domestic violence came up. This cannot be easy. You were talking about the Director of Public Prosecutions and his potential role in the Stand Your Ground legislation. You cannot divorce domestic violence and that issue that is quite rampant in our country, by the way,
yes,
from the issue of the Stand Your Ground legislation. Because if let's just take a household, for example, a man and a woman has access to a firearm user's license and they have a firearm, and there is a dispute, a domestic dispute, but the firearm really is for outside intruders. How do you stop a woman from protecting herself or defending herself with a firearm? You see the gray area that I'm talking about here, Mr. Ali.
Yes, and Ryan, you're so pointed this morning, and that issue of domestic violence, and let's look at it in the context of the legislation, may I say at the very outset that if you look at the definition section of the bill, you'll see exactly how a home invader is defined. If you go a little bit lower into the legislation, you'll see in the area of exception in the marginal notes, you'll see clearly a person who has the legitimacy to be in the dwelling house. In other words, is an occupant of the dwelling house. So why am I saying those two things? Mm-hmm. I'm saying it to immediately indicate that when we are speaking about domestic violence, we are speaking of persons in a relationship that is properly defined under the Domestic Violence Act. So when we're speaking about stand your ground and home invasion, in my respectful view, domestic violence is not within that context.
And I get that, but Mr. Ali, with all due respect, how do you tell a woman who is being choked
Yes.
or physically harmed, or and vice versa,
Yes.
I mean, but I'm just using a woman as an example. But how do you tell that woman not to defend herself with perhaps the only means that she has to defend herself in that context if she's locked in? You get where I'm going with this?
Yeah, most certainly. And this is where now I'll give you where there's a general defense, self-defense, where there's the criminal law in terms of use of force. So the stand your ground speaks specifically about home invasion. But if someone in a domestic violence situation, as you indicated, is seeing imminent threat to life, death, that person in law under the Criminal Law Act Section 4 and also under the principles of self-defense can take the necessary action to be able to preserve life and limb. So I want us to just divorce it a little bit. So you're looking at stand your ground for specific persons where they are defined as persons who are a home invader. But someone who has the legitimacy to be in the home but is seeing a situation of domestic violence and their life is threatened, the Criminal Law Act as it stands and the general principles of self-defense will be factored in those circumstances.
So you are saying that they will have a legal case that could stand up in court? Most
certainly, Ryan. And you see, those are why I'm saying that I acknowledge and it was encouraged by the consultation because of those same very, very nagging issues that needs to be fleshed out properly so that the citizen is clearly aware that stand your ground is not to be factored in a domestic situation where the person who is using the force or the person against whom the force is used has a legitimacy to be in that particular dwelling house.
All right, Mr. Ali, always appreciate you and the TTPS for showing up and answering the questions at Trinidad and Tobago. It's not easy, the job you do, but we appreciate you coming on the program.
Thank you very much for having me, Ryan, and an excellent line of questioning. I thought for a moment, I'm in an interrogation.
Absolutely not. And
yes.
Please pass on my apologies to the Commissioner for raising your rank without his permission.
Well, I hope he listens to you, Ryan.
Let's take a break here on the Morning Brew. We'll be right back.